My next guest is Andrea Haas. With over 2 decades of experience in education and a desire to keep good teachers in the profession, Andrea founded Elm Tree Education. Elm Tree is dedicated to providing accessible, ongoing online professional development customized to meet the diverse needs of students. Andrea, a national board certified teacher in literacy, has an extensive background in designing professional development programs for teachers and mentoring educators. Her unwavering passion lies in literacy instruction, particularly in cultivating practices that embrace the whole child and prioritize cultural responsiveness and inclusivity. Welcome to the podcast, Andrea.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start off with the trench story. I ask everybody about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Yeah. So, my career has taken lots of twists and turns. Like you said, I've been in this game now for 20 years, and so a little over 20 years. And so I realized pretty early on that something that I need, something that's like my personality, is that I never want to say that when I master something, because that's never true. I don't think you ever actually master teaching ever, like ever. I mean, I think you get better, but I don't know that you ever like master it. I think you could always grow, even when you're like in your last final years. But when I would get to a position and then I would feel like, okay, I've got this I kind of got this handled. That's usually when I would get what I kind of call my like 5-year itch, that I needed to kind of like, okay, well then let's do something different. I need a challenge. I need something more. And so for me, getting out of the trenches happened often because I would get into a place and I was like, okay, if this has become too automatic for me and I'm not challenging myself or having to do some learning and growing, then I need to make a step out and go do something else. And so for me, that's looked like changing districts, changing positions between special education and general education, changing grade levels. And then once I was a little over a decade in to the profession, it was actually getting out of the classroom and taking on more teacher leadership roles. So I knew pretty early on I never wanted to be an administrator. That just doesn't feel like that's something that would feed me, is to manage people and things and and all the things that you do as an administrator. But I do want to affect change, and I do like working with other teachers. So because I think that's kind of the best of both worlds for me, is that I love working with other teachers and kind of imparting some of the things that I've learned along the way and best practices, and then also getting to work with students still when if I go into a classroom or those kinds of things. And now these days, what I'm offering is online, because I just feel like one of the things that the good part about COVID was that people kind of became more open to doing some learning remotely. And I still think there's a lot of power in being in the classroom, like in real time, and doing some one-on-one coaching or modeling instruction and all those kinds of things. But, not every teacher has access to that. And so, if they're in a school district that's remote and, they don't have the financial resources and they don't have just the infrastructure in their district set up to support teachers, like they're going to be looking for ways to have opportunities, and they might not have the money to go travel to another bigger city where a conference is happening or where you might take a workshop. And honestly, I also think sometimes with workshops, some could be really great, but often you're in that workshop, you're energized, you want to try something on, you go back to your classroom. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you get like overwhelmed by other things. And that, I mean, in the old days, it was the binder, right? You used to have all these binders on your shelf because of all the classes and workshops. You'd put the binder on the shelf, you wouldn't look at it again. Or maybe you try with one little thing. But what I found for me personally was I wanted to try it, but then I needed to like keep talking about it afterwards. Like there needed to be follow-up for me. It needed to be ongoing. And so that's what I'm really passionate about, because there's a lot of complex things happening in education, but I think that there are some teachers who are just dying on the vine because there's been so many other things that have
Yeah,
had to take
yeah, it's true.
priority and precedent. And teacher growth and learning in some places has really taken a pretty big step back. It's kind of on the back burner now, which is unfortunate because I think that's like the number one factor in whether you're going to be successful is if you're investing in the teachers. But
Mm.
that's my opinion. So,
So, given that you are offering PD online, how does that follow through? Like, if a teacher takes a course or if a team from a school takes a course, is there ongoing like coaching or just some type of follow up with them after they're done with it?
yes. So, and I'm trying to create also just like lots of different options for the busy teacher. Like if they really want to purchase a course that's completely done, offline, I have some things that are recorded.
Mhm.
I'm right now in a pilot phase with a program that I'm doing that's going to be a 5 week. I'm calling it kind of like a flip classroom style, where I'll send
Okay.
out videos once a week for the teachers to watch at their leisure, and I'm going to chunk them up into like little bite-sized pieces so you can binge it or you can just
Mhm.
watch like a little bit at a time when you have time. And then the time that we come together for a live Zoom call is when we actually like dig in. Like, so how do you
Okay.
apply this in your classroom? What did we talk about last week? Having some maybe accountability. Like, so
Okay.
you said last week you're going to try this on. How did it go? Like, let's talk about it. And this is a place for us to like experiment, and it's okay if we fail, but like let's give some things a try and then see what we think and talk and learn and grow from each other and create that community. And then after the 5 weeks are up, my intention is that there would be like a follow-up. There wouldn't be any new content coming, but there would be um and maybe not once a week, but there'd be like once every couple weeks, like a group kind of coaching call, check in, like how are you, like how's it going now that we're
Mhm.
a
Yeah.
month out, now that we're a couple months out. Um,
Mhm.
and so I'm still in the pilot phase of that. I'm trying to make sure that before I launch it like widely, I, you know, refine it and dial it into what I mean. I think I know what I would have wanted as a teacher in the classroom, but not everybody's Andrea. So I want to
True.
make sure that
True.
I'm hitting the mark before it gets launched widely. But that's the kind of thing that I want to create is ways for there to be community, to be collaboration, learning, and that it's not just like a one and done kind of thing.
Yeah, it sounds like a good way of trying this out, like you said, a pilot phase to see how it works for these groups. And then, once you're done with that, maybe expand it to a larger,
Mhm.
clientele, like you said. I wanted to talk to you a little bit, since you are a literacy specialist, about the science of reading, and then how a lot of teachers might oversimplify the multifaceted nature of reading instruction, at
Mhm.
least at the elementary school level.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say that, my actual teaching expertise is at the elementary school level. When I mentored K-8. I spent a lot of time
Okay.
in some middle schools. Only a tiny bit in high school. So I will say that I can't necessarily speak, maybe I don't have the street cred when it comes to
Yeah.
secondary as much. Although I think good teaching is good teaching no matter what, but wherever you are. But from the reading perspective, yeah, the thing that is so interesting right now about this particular uh time, and it's been like the last 5 years probably, uh, is just how the conversation around reading became pretty narrow.
Mhm.
And some of that was because of reporting that happened, podcasts, media attention, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting because when people talk about the science of reading, and this happens a lot in education in general, like if I say guided reading or balanced reading or science of reading or inquiry based or project based, whatever, like if I say these words and then I talk to 5 different people, their definition of what that thing is in
Sure.
education is going to vary
Yeah.
because I feel like some things get lost in translation. And science of reading is one where I think it gets lost in translation. And I guess I don't think it, I know it, because when I talk to some teachers, even the way they ask me questions,
Mhm.
I have to say, okay, I want to back up. To you, what does it mean when we say science of reading? Because if they'll say something like, well, my district wants me to put in science of reading protocols. I'm like, what are that? What's that? The research says nothing about protocols. Like there's,
Okay.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like there's no, or the district, I have to make more time for science of reading in my classroom. I'm like, well, weren't you already teaching reading? These are
Mhm.
the kinds of things that like I'm hearing. And I get why. I can see it from a systems perspective, why this has all happened. And I can
Sure.
see how the conversation has gone. But like I'm also aware of the history. And like this isn't a brand new conversation. This conversation has been happening for decades and decades and decades about like what's the best way and and is it this way or is it that way? And the truth is we need all the things. Like it can't just be about decoding words off the page. It's got to be also about comprehension. So,
Yeah.
and so the thing I worry about is when all of a sudden like there's a really big spotlight on like one area of reading, are you doing that at the expense of all the other things?
Sure.
And lately, like who's been even talking about writing instruction lately? Nobody. Like they're talking about reading, but like the writing and the reading go hand in hand. And so, or speaking and listening, for example, like, so it's interesting when when we have this kind of laser focus all of a sudden, and it's kind of coming culturally. And then there's some of that culture wars thing that's coming into play that's happening not just in education, but kind of in a lot of places in our country
Yeah.
that there is a either or, and really it's a both and so that's the kind of stuff that I am also hoping to support teachers, because I just feel like even people who've been teaching longer than me don't even know which way is up anymore with reading because of what the district has asked them to do, and I
Sure.
always say the district, which is like who's that anyway, but
The powers that be.
yeah, the powers that be. Um, and there are, I mean, I know there are places all over this country where there are some intense mandates happening,
Mhm.
some, thou shall not say these words anymore, or you have to use this particular curriculum with fidelity. That's another fun word
Yeah.
in education. Uh, but, um, but there's just so much to that just is not the thing. And I think again, this is going to be my Andrea, as you're probably gathering, I have a lot of things I feel pretty passionate about and
Mhm.
opinionated about in education, but um, I just feel like all this stuff about curriculum and all this conversation about trying to teacher proof things,
Sure.
um, by buying these scripted curriculum, like when all this stuff started happening, I kept looking around going like, why didn't we already figure out this doesn't work? Like I thought we already knew this
Yeah.
doesn't work, and it's because again, I think we're focusing on the wrong thing. Like we're trying to put like a band-aid on some huge gash on a like a head wound, how they like bleed
Yeah.
like profusely, right? It's like trying to take like a little tiny band-aid and putting it on this huge gashing head wound of the gap that we have of kids who are going through our system and not learning how to read. And really, the source of all of this is, again, the teachers. Because
Yeah.
I think it doesn't matter what curriculum you have, if the teacher doesn't understand the full breadth and depth of knowledge of all the things you need to know to be able to teach reading and to be able to diagnose and react in the moment and give the right support and just all of those things that have to happen, the curriculum is not going to matter because we're not teaching robots, we're teaching kids, and
Yeah.
they're going to need different things. And the curriculum publishers make a lot of assumptions about who the kids are in the seats in front of you, and
Yep.
often those assumptions could not be more wrong. So yeah, that's just that's like I guess that's my why. I just want to keep good teachers in the
Yeah.
profession because I think they are um just not getting the support that they need. And
Yeah.
I know it's a systems issue, and I know that like, you know, can I make a difference in the whole world? No, but can I make a little difference in my corner of the world? Yes. And so that's kind of what fuels me and excites me about the work that I do.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think we spoke a little bit in the pre-chat just about how in my work I'm seeing that with teachers who are using both in ELD and in language arts classes at a middle school, these new curricula even in social studies, I think as well, that the district mandates, right? And then
Mhm.
like, I remember like 9 years ago, like we were going away from the curriculum when I was teaching foreign language, but that's the question, like, why are we going back to this? And as well, like you say, yeah, we have kids that have various needs, but how can we trust that the publishers really know how to really scaffold because they're not in the classroom? They might have been in the classroom, but it's maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And then
Mhm.
the district powers that be, whether it's a district coach or, a curriculum person at the district, they might be going into schools every so often, but they are not teaching the classes using the curriculum.
Mhm.
So I'm
Mhm.
seeing how like there is that disconnect, right? From that, like, okay, let's use this curriculum with fidelity, but those people who are saying it are not actually teaching the class, seeing how the kids are reacting to these questions, the scripted questions,
Yeah.
all kids can learn the same way type thing. So that kind of leads into my next talking point, which I'm experiencing a lot at my school with a high number of ELDs. And I know in a lot of schools, they have increased in their numbers of multilingual learners. So, what are your thoughts on vocab acquisition for ELDs?
Yeah, I think the thing about ELDs in general is, and again, I can see the big system. I can see all the pressures of like we got to get them in here and we need our test scores and they've got to be meeting these standards and we got to all these kinds of things, and it's just like the truth is like you know we're asking an awful lot of children who
Yeah,
are, suddenly immersed, some of them especially, like, I'm just thinking of some of those newcomers I know, that I've worked with or seen, and it's just like, we're really asking a lot of them, and, um, they they can get exposure to language, and it doesn't have to be pulling the print off the text yet, like,
yeah,
and it also doesn't have to be going to, I know a lot of the middle school teachers that I worked with were always worried about like presenting something that felt too babyish, to like 12-year-olds. And I do think that there's been a lot of progress in that. There are some companies now like High Noon Books. There's one called Sam and Friends that are creating books that are a little bit more geared towards what a tween or preteen, preteen kind of would want to be reading and not too babyish, yet using simpler text, like
mm,
decodable text that they can send out. But I think that one of the things that I'm just been thinking about a lot lately, and I've been really digging into this with some of the readings I've been doing and some of the podcasts I'm listening to that have guests who are much more expert on this than myself, um, is just this idea of like not looking at these students who are multilingual as having deficits. And I feel like that's where we really keep coming from. And it's like, why can't they have a conversation with a peer in their home language if they have one? Like if uh most of the class is English speakers, yet you've got a couple pockets of Spanish speakers or maybe even Portuguese or Ukrainian or whatever. Like, why can't the one who has a little bit more oral language experience be that scaffold for those ELD kids? I just feel like sorry. I just feel like there has been there's been some shifts. I mean, I think for a while people were like, you need to use English in this country and all that kind of stuff that was, wrong, that was what it was. And I don't feel like I see that anymore at all. But like where are they strong? And some of these
yeah, yeah,
languages have like a really rich oral language history. Like their storytelling is oral. It's not actually written. And um so where do they have those strengths? And again, you're not going to know as the teacher, you're not going to know all the languages. You're obviously not going to be multilingual yourself. I mean, maybe you are, and that's great. But um but what can you be doing? And also like there's just tools. I mean, we have Google Translate now, and I know it's not perfect, and things might, again, literally get lost in translation a little bit, but like, I've just seen some teachers do some amazing things with, there's one fifth grade teacher that I've worked with that I know that she'll have a math story problem up on her TV screen that she's projecting from her laptop. And just in the bottom corner, because she has a pretty large group of Spanish speakers in her classroom. So just in the bottom corner, she will have translated that story problem on the slide just down there. Like just, and some of them can't, because they're fifth graders, some of them can't actually read in Spanish, some of them can't, but like,
Yeah.
it's just there as like a scaffold. And it's not like she didn't have to do a whole bunch of work. She just had to go put it in Google and then copy and paste, So, um, and again, it's not going to be perfect, but I feel like thinking of those students as having all these deficits and I've got to get them caught
Yeah.
up and all that stuff is just it's a hard approach. And for really it's a mindset that is not super positive for you or the child if you're coming at it from what are they not doing versus like starting from where they are, where their
Yeah.
strengths are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it takes time. Also getting to know the student, especially when you're receiving students throughout the year
Yeah.
and knowing like what can they do, what are their strengths, what are their interests, those types of things. But yeah, it is definitely, there are scaffolds that you can use. There's ways of helping them, use their cognates, use their background knowledge as well. Let's talk a little bit about challenges that teachers are facing now, differentiating instruction, especially some of the practical strategies that you have given to teachers and addressing those challenges.
Yeah. So I think, what you just said right there about getting to know the students is some of the easiest ways to differentiate. And I know that seems like kind of like what does that mean, Andrea? But um, you know, kind of a little bit harkening back to what we just talked about with scripted curriculum is and saying like, we're not teaching robots, is that if you are building those relationships and getting to know and really coming at it from a strengths perspective for all kids, not just our multilingual learners, um, and involving them in the process, it's gonna be so much more powerful. And I think that a lot of kids sort of feel like school is done to them, or
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like that, yeah, you know what I mean? Like I have to be here. I have to like do this. It's a lot of compliance and like um some of it's being graded honestly on behavior and did I carry out something that was a behavioral expectation? And so I might be behaviorally engaged, but that doesn't mean I'm cognitively engaged. Like if I've just done, you wanted me to write a paragraph, I did it. You wanted me to turn it in on Friday, I got it. Like, and that's it. You know, um, someone on the outside might say, well, look at this student. They're like, meeting all these expectations. But then like later on, if you ask them to like try to apply that learning or if could they transfer that to anywhere else or are they even like into it and it like does it feel
Yeah.
relevant to their life? Like there's all those kinds of things. So I just think that sometimes, and I am not going to dismiss that there are so many challenges because I know there are behavior challenges that can be hard. I know there are, academic challenges that are hard. And so I don't want to make light of it, but I also want to say that sometimes I think we are overthinking it because we just need to get to know the kids and then and then find the ways in from, again, their strengths and what they want to do and having them like self-assess, especially the upper elementary and middle school kids. Like, I mean, if we ask them, they know, like they know more,
Yeah.
like they know what they're doing or not doing. You know what I'm saying? Like they can kind of say like, yeah, if I look at like all these skills that I should learn in this ELA class for 7th grade, like I should be able, like, am I going to be able to do all these things by the end of the year? I hope so. But like, where am I at now? Like, am I doing this already or am I not there yet? Like, and having some of that self-assessment, I think is powerful and it gives them more agency and control. And I think it also, like I said, it just makes it more relevant and engaging. Because then it doesn't feel like school is being done to them, but they're actually like part of it, like, and they're invested in it because it's on their terms a little bit.
Do you have some strategies in terms of how teachers can critically evaluate and select effective curriculum material, especially if that's they're in the process with their school or district and they have to find resources for reading instruction.
Yeah. So the one thing uh, that I think is also interesting is that a lot of things these days have been stamped evidence-based,
Yeah.
and that term has become really empty. Like,
Mhm.
like, um, it 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 just is like a buzzword. It's kind of just like it's just a marketing term now. Like it's kind of like saying something is new and improved. Like can
Yeah.
it really be new and improved? Yeah. And in this case, the evidence base is like, well, so what's the evidence? Like, and especially because I feel like some of these publishing houses, they were responding so quickly to a need that they threw together stuff pretty quickly. And I get what they're doing. Again, I can always get like why things are happening the way they're happening, but I get worried because I think a lot of school districts are putting in millions of dollars into buying something that is stamped evidence-based, or again, it's stamped science of reading. And again, science of reading is the body of research. It's not, the research doesn't tell you, researchers never think, oh, I found some sort of finding. Now I'm telling you that you have to do it this way in your classroom, because usually when they've done the research, it's been in a completely different environment that has, like it, especially some of the neurological research, like that's in a laboratory, like with like 3 kids and no distractions and all those things. And so, like the
Yeah.
researchers are not, they're not saying like, this is how you should teach. They're saying, oh, this is something interesting we've discovered. We don't know the implications of it yet, but like, this is something interesting, right? But
Yeah.
I think that like so much of the stuff gets stamped like science of reading. And usually again, what they mean is phonics, and that's not what it is. But they're trying to make so many districts happy. And so what ends up happening is they put like everything in the kitchen sink in these curricula. Like they're like,
Yeah.
like there's a basal reader, and there's also small group reading, and then there's also like all these workbooks, and like like there's a workbook about grammar, and there's a workbook about for spelling, and there's a workbook about writing, and then there's also an online component, and you can like do this and that. And then what ends up happening is the poor teachers, like this is I just heard this term recently. It's called the basal bloat, which basically means some of these basal curriculum, like they just put so much stuff in it, it gets so bloated because they're trying to make everybody happy. So they have to have all these things like, well, I know this district's really looking for this, so we got to put this in here. And this district would really want this. Like that's what they're valuing or whatever. And then the teachers get it and they're like, okay, great. Like, here's all this stuff. How on earth am I possibly going to teach it all? And the answer is you're not. Like, you are not going to be able to teach it all. And but they don't really give you any guidance of like, well, so then what do you do? Like, how do you filter it out? How do you prioritize?
Yeah.
So I think when you're looking at curriculum, I think you really have to be careful about, and just be critical, like of anything that says evidence-based, like, and say like, okay, but what is this evidence, and how is this evidence gathered? You know, like again, do we pilot this in like 10 classrooms all in Ohio? Or did we like pilot it like across the district
Yeah.
and very different kind of populations? Like what is it that really showed evidence of student learning? And again, just because it worked for you over there, that doesn't mean that same curriculum is going to work for me over there, because we have too much of a human element in our job, like because the teacher matters, the kids matter. And so it's hard. So I just again, I know I feel like a little bit of a broken record, because I also know that teachers don't have time to create their own curriculum. So like they need something. They need to start from somewhere. I just would like to see people spending more of that money into training the teachers than they are into the actual materials that some will just sit on the shelf and not even get used, because there's no time to possibly use all that stuff. And again, as a district, you spent millions of dollars on all these materials. So,
Yeah, or just spending, more time for them to have more PLC or common planning across the district, across
mm-hmm,
content areas
mm-hmm.
to create their own, the goals and the um, backwards planning and all that kind of stuff. That's not necessarily based on a curriculum. So,
Yeah,
like you
yeah.
said, they're trying to sell their curricula with a buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
I did find it interesting, though. I was recently at the National Conference for Foreign Language Teachers, ACTFL, and I hadn't been there for 10 years. And then the amount of publishers, at least the ones that had like huge areas, like of the exhibit hall, there was only like one that had a huge area. Like they had some ones that had like a table or two, but like 10 years ago and 20 years ago, the publishers, there would be many of them that had these like huge areas of the exhibit hall. So at least in terms of, well, language teaching, my background, they had like a lot, at least they're not making the teachers use, a lot of districts are not making the teachers use a specific curriculum anymore. So I think those,
Oh,
um, yeah, those publishers are maybe not earning as much money. I think a lot of those teachers are picking and choosing what they want to use, maybe parts of a curriculum, but not like, okay, the district's mandating you just follow this and that from a curriculum. But like you
yeah.
said, I see it where I currently am with the literacy instruction, the ELD, the social studies instruction, that they are tied to something that has probably been evidence based, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like, I would rather see, like you said, like a group of teachers look at some things and say, okay, because no curriculum's going to have it all. I mean, we know that already. Like, there's just no curriculum that's going to have everything that you need for your classroom. And I also get, like, we can't have people doing things willy-nilly. Like, I can't have this one teacher teaching it this way and this teacher teaching it this way. So that when the kids move up, like, some of them have this background, some of them don't have that background, whatever. So that's why you would come together and like make a consensus together as in a PLC of like looking and saying like, we really like this aspect, but it doesn't have anything to do with writing in there. So how are we going to put the writing in there? Oh, there might be a couple resources, or we will write our own units that go and match up with what we're doing in social studies, and we'll team up with like the social studies teacher. And if they're studying ancient civilizations, maybe we can be talking about writing some sort of 5-paragraph essay on ancient civilizations. So they can be doing some of the work in this class and this class. Because again, like in the real world, we don't have our learning siloed like that. Like, we wouldn't be like just only focusing on like this one little skill in this one space, because those skills carry over to the other subject areas. So yeah, that's what I would love to see. If I could wave my magic wand in like a perfect world, it would be that we'd be giving teachers more time to learn and to grapple and to try things on and um create their own curriculum that they could really, so giving them that time to do it. Because right now
yeah.
I know they don't have that time to do it. So it's complex.
Yep, yep. And here we have a lot of teachers who might be new to the profession. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
we have a lot of jobs that haven't been filled, but when we're talking about teacher prep programs, how do they fall short when it comes to preparing educators for the realities of teaching reading and writing?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because also they're a business as well. And so I think the one thing that I've noticed that's happened over the last, I don't know, a couple decades really, has been this idea that, we need more teachers. So here's a master's in teaching program, or here's a teacher certification program.
Yeah,
And it might, and that's separate from like getting like a bachelor's degree or, some sort of 4-year degree. And they're usually like become a teacher quick programs is what I like to say. Like,
yeah,
they're only a year long, and they cram a lot of courses into a quarter. And then they have, I mean, they're usually trying to juggle classes and student teaching at the same time, because of just the way that it's set up for them. And it might be a couple of years, but usually it's more like a year, maybe a year and a half, like maybe 5 quarters, perhaps. And um, the classes that they take are great in a like as a starting point. Like, and that you might just barely scratch the surface. And then it becomes this kind of make or break thing about like who is your cooperating teacher that you have your student teaching placement with, because if they aren't solid on some of their practices, you're only going to do what you've seen modeled for you, right? And um I think that it's just not enough time. Like, it's just not enough time. It's not enough information, it's not enough time, and it's not enough practical hands-on time of trying it out. Like, I wish, again, if I had my magic wand, I wish we were able to do a little bit more like a residency program, kind of like, medicine does, like, where y you could have a little bit more experiences in different settings versus you have a student teaching placement that's a very length. I mean, I know every state has like a requirement for certification, so I know it's going to be something somewhat standard, but I feel like each college kind of has their own kind of program of how they do it. But, if I ended up student teaching in let's say I student taught in first grade, but yeah, I am K-8 um certified once I'm done with my program. Like, am I really ready to go teach 7th grade middle schoolers? Like I only did first grade, and so it would be so great to me. It'd be so great if they had much more practical experiences, like, spent a little bit of time in a middle school, spent a little bit of time in upper elementary, spent a little bit of time in lower, like, so that you could actually kind of like see like the bigger picture of where this is all headed. Um, because even teachers who switch grade levels, like, maybe I taught 5th grade for 5 years, and now I because of staffing or cuts, or we've had to consolidate or whatever, now I have to go down to 2nd grade. Well, whoa, like, those kids are different learners than my 5th graders in reading, and they're gonna need different skills as a whole group, not just like, some individual kids who might be struggling. It's gonna be like a completely different set of skills we're teaching at 2nd grade because 'cause they're still on the early side of learning. Like, they're just now starting to kinda pick it up versus theoretically at 5th grade, they're much more skilled at pulling the print off the page, and it's now getting into the deeper comprehension work, um, independently, whereas it's a little bit more scaffolded and supported in 2nd grade. So yeah, I wish that we had a way for teachers to have much more practical experience for a lot longer. But again, time, money, shortage of people in the profession, like you said, unfilled positions, you know, we're doing the best we can in the situation we have.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, if there was actually an industry where we were able to pay people,
Mhm.
maybe a beginner teacher salary that's very low in some states for that internship, or practicum experience, right? And so they would do that for a year or 2, and then there would be less teachers leaving the profession because maybe they'd be placed in those 3 different levels for a year, and then they'd be earning, um, at least something, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's what the hard thing is. I mean, there are some people get who are getting into teaching after they've been subbing for a while, or
Yeah.
they might be subbing alongside of doing a bachelor's degree, so they've gotten in classrooms as a sub. So I'm seeing that happen more, but I do think that there are a lot of people, like you said, they're maybe changing careers or they getting into teaching quick, and they don't have that wider range of experience, across grade levels. So
Yeah.
good point. So another question about reading in terms of effective ways. So if we have a curriculum, or if we have just we're at a school, right, where they may teach reading a different way than we're used to, how is a teacher supposed to separate the sheep from the goats when it comes to
Yeah.
figuring out the most effective ways of teaching reading, which could also be if they went from a 5th grade to a 2nd grade class.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what's tricky, and again, it's all about, like, the labels. What are people telling you is really, uh uh, the true story. So, I guess I'd say that, like, some of those misconceptions are what are, if you put your intention, like, we'll just take phonics because that's really the main thing that's been, like, the big buzz right now lately, and it's like, "Oh, we weren't teaching kids how to really decode words because we weren't teaching them systematic phonics instruction, and this is what we weren't doing." And which is also a huge blanket statement for an entire country. But anyway, it's because I'm pretty sure that's not the case everywhere. But if we're gonna get that laser focus, whenever you're gonna focus on something else, you can't do it at the expense of emphasizing the other things that are important. And so I think when I'm saying, when I think about the sheep from the goats, I'm thinking like, hey, like, let's just take a step back and be critical consumers of everything we're taking in right now. like really think here, because um there's propaganda all over the place about teaching reading right now. And if you're not going to a source, a real trusted source, like the What Works Clearinghouse, for example, because that one, like, they only have things on there that have gone through a rigorous process of weeding out what's the high quality, like, it's gone through all the real steps of scientific research, and then we've tried some things on in classrooms, and then this is kind of what we've seen. um if you're not going to some place like that, you're gonna get a skewed opinion on what you should do or shouldn't do. And really, in the end, like, as teachers, we are researchers every day. Like, that's what you're doing. You're in the classroom, you're taking in data, like, you're looking to see, you're making a hypothesis. I think this kid needs to work on this, and then you try something out and you see if it works, and then you go. So, like, and that's like a different kind of research, obviously. But I think that when you're trying to figure stuff out, like, I just don't believe these claims that somebody is going to give you a silver bullet. Like, if you just do this, your kids will read. Like, because
Yeah.
there just is no silver bullet. As much as we want there to be, there just isn't. And
Mhm.
I mean, that's the way it is with all things in education. There's no silver bullet for classroom management. Like, there's no silver bullet for kids learning, their math facts fluently necessarily. Like, because again, we have variables, a lot of them. Sometimes some classrooms have 30 different variables of learners
Mhm.
in the room. And so, um, yeah, I think when I'm talking to teachers, I'm saying, like, okay, I know you have this curriculum, but, like, what do your kids really need? Like,
Mhm.
let's really think about what your kids need. Are you noticing, what are the patterns that you're noticing? Are you noticing that, like, they are not transferring, even though you have this, like, shiny, grammar curriculum, for example? Are they actually transferring it to their writing? Like, or does it feel, again, too siloed? So, like, okay, well, then change your approach. Like, that's not the thing, and maybe you can use that as a springboard. But, um, I also think that sometimes, um, people are really scared of, because if it's been a mandate and it's been like, you must teach this with fidelity, they're really scared of, like, trying to make any sort of changes or,
Mhm.
like, using their
Mhm.
professional judgment. And to that, I always say, like, is there curriculum police in your district? Like, and maybe there are, but, like, usually they're not. Like, I can't imagine that your administrator is going around going, like, she was supposed to say this in this lesson and she said this instead. Like, I don't think that anybody's doing that. Like, why would they have that time? So I think that you can use those materials, but you should still be instructing, like, you should still be creating the lesson that is going to reach your kids, because like, trusting yourself. Like, I don't want people to lose trust in their abilities or their own agency, for goodness sakes, to be able to do what they know
Yeah.
works with their kids.
Yeah, I think like you said, getting the information from the right sources. A lot of newer teachers might be getting it from social media or from
Yes.
things people share in Facebook groups they're in. But like you mentioned, clearinghouses and really don't trust that there is a one size fits all or a gimmick, right? Selling point that
Yeah.
some of these curricula or some of these programs might say, hey, where everybody's going to be able to read if they follow this formula,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah, exactly. And they just can't promise that. So yeah,
yeah.
be skeptical of anybody who is, you know, I don't want to say it's a snake oil salesman, because that's a little bit, it's not quite that bad. But but like, just be critical consumer and really think, like, okay, like, what, just try to take all the noise out. And yeah, and that is what I worry about a little bit with the new teachers, is because I'm seeing stuff all over the place on social media, and, like, you know anything that I personally am putting on social media for Elm Tree Education, I know I can go back to a trusted source to say, and this is why I'm saying this. Like, I'm not just putting out some sort of blanket statement because I heard somebody else online say something, and now that's, like, the word around reading instruction. I'm making sure that I have evidence to back up that has been studied, there is research, and I'm not just cherry picking the research, I'm I'm following different organizations online that maybe you would say would be skewed one way or the other, because I'm trying to be a bit of a centrist in all of this
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
reading wars bit. So I, you know, I'm trying to make sure that I am saying what I truly believe based on the research that I've done is true. And if I'm not, then I want people to call me out on it, and I want to have a discussion because I want to learn and grow. And I'm also not saying that I should, will always have it right every time either. But I'm really careful because I don't want to be putting out any misinformation, because I think there's plenty of that already out in the world right now.
Yeah, no, that's it's good to like share with these people. Like it's best to know where you can find your sources that are, that have evidence, that have been peer reviewed and those types of things. And
Exactly.
um, a lot of the teachers today are dealing with decreased student engagement, or the school might not be giving their students enough student agency, just in terms of what's being mandated, et cetera. So how can teachers foster greater student agency and classroom engagement?
I think it's the one thing that I would encourage any teacher to do, new or veteran, is to think about how much of your teaching time is you
Yeah.
spotlighted. Because we know that the person who's doing all the talking is the one who's going to be doing the learning, or the
Yeah.
thinking, right? Right. So, and it doesn't need to be you. You already theoretically know all this content, so shouldn't need to be, if you're going to be facilitating the learning. And that's the other bit is like, are you seeing yourself as a lecturer? Are you seeing yourself as a facilitator? Are you, like, are you a tutor? Like, how are you really, like, what's your role in the classroom? Because
Mhm.
I think ideally, if we were to give kids a lot more voice and choice within like reason, it doesn't have to be like a willy-nilly choice. It can be like you have these choices. In what they were doing, we wouldn't see kids check out so much. Because again, it just doesn't feel relevant to their lives. Like it just doesn't feel like, why does this matter? Like, you know, and I think that if you can try to remove yourself from being the sage on the stage, as they like to say, like if you can try to figure out a way that you are um, making both personal, like, building relationship connections, but then also connections to their lives, um, you're going to have much more buy-in, and you're going to have a group of really engaged kids who want to be in your class. Like if you're able to also pass over some of the control too, which I know, I mean, I'm not saying that, I mean, I'm very type A, so I'm not going to say that this might feel like pot calling kettle black, but I think a lot of teachers that I've met are, I mean, can say that sometimes control is something that
Mhm.
they like to have. And so when it doesn't feel like it's in their control, that gets a little bit uncomfortable. But again, I think it's like the same thing, like, are you giving them choice within a certain parameter, and you're giving them some control within a certain parameter, and, having them come up with like the ideas of how or what should we study? Like, you know, if I am a social studies teacher and we are covering World War II, for example, like, can the kids have some say over what exactly, like what part of World War II do they want to like focus in on? What perspective, what resources will they be gravitating towards because they want to learn about, you know, I don't know, like internment camps or whatever, like, or something, or they don't want to do that. They want to focus much more on, what was happening in the US at that time and versus what was happening over in Europe or whatever, like that they can have some way of getting there, because it doesn't always have to be the same path
Yeah.
um for everybody. And that's the part where I know when we're trying to think about inclusive education and we're trying to think about ways that we're representing lots of different voices of history, and we're trying to think about ways to get kids engaged, I think that all of that connects is like giving them different pathways, giving them a voice in how they're going to do it. Because it doesn't have to be the classic test always to demonstrate learning either.
Yeah. No, that's great advice in terms of what teachers can think about, like in terms of finding out what they like, um, how they want to show their learning, and also really assessing their time talking
Yes.
and how much like they're actually up and speaking in front of the class as opposed to maybe working alongside a group of students. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Well, we've had a great conversation today around reading strategies, vocab differentiation, etc. Out of everything we've talked about today on the podcast, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Um, yeah, we cover a lot of good ground. I think it really is just being, if you can just kind of get quiet and tune out the noise and just be really true to, who you are as a teacher and what you bring to the table, and have that be the thing that is like top of your mind, then figure out how these other things can fit in. Because I feel like sometimes we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole for some
Mhm.
folks, like with these mandates. And again, I see it as a system. I understand why. I understand the whole thing. but we're humans, and so are the kids in front of us, and we have to acknowledge that there is an art to this. It can't always
Mhm.
be the science, that it has to be about the people in the room. And so as a teacher, just like, if you feel like you've been kind of like bumping up against systems right now that
Mhm.
aren't true to who you are, like, how can you make a change? Do you need to go teach in a different building? Do you need to, like, um, see if there's ways that you can put yourself back into what you're doing? And again, not just like take something at face value, not just, sit there and say the scripted curriculum, but
Right.
how can you put yourself back in it? Because I think you'll get your joy
Mhm.
back, and the kids will feel joyful too.
Yeah, I think that's a good advice to end with in terms of kind of what you've done. Like if you've um really not getting passion out of what you're doing or what you're being asked to do, like go teach a different level, maybe look at a different district, um, and then find out where you can grow, because we're always growing as educators. Well,
Hmm.
where can people connect with you and find you online?
Yeah, so elmtreeed.com is my website, so you can see me there. But then also there's an Elm Tree Ed Instagram, and I have a YouTube channel. I've been doing these little, I'm calling them lit bits, where I've taken teacher submitted questions and I'm answering them just like in little bits of time. So like it's a video that's usually less than 15-20 minutes.
Okay.
And so you can see those. They also turn into blog posts on the website as well. You can follow me on Facebook. I just have my regular profile now is just Andrea Haas. If you just search for
Okay.
that, you can find me. And I'm trying to think. I'll be honest, I'm on LinkedIn, but I don't hardly use it. So that's probably
Okay.
not the best place to find me. It's probably more Instagram, to be honest.
Okay. Sounds good. I'll make sure I include those links in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was really interesting conversation about something we're all teaching in our own way, because that affects all of our content areas in terms of
It sure
reading.
does. It sure does.